Don't even think about it, Chris. You aren't coming tonight. I don't want them to think we are some charity case. I didn't even look up from the kitchen table. I didn't need to. I could hear the sharp, rhythmic click of Chloe's 4-inch heels against the linoleum, a sound that had once been music to my ears but now felt like a countdown. I kept my eyes on the 2 plates of pasta I'd prepared. My grandmother's recipe, the one Chloe used to swear was better than any 5-star meal in the city. Now, the steam rising from the bowls seemed to mock me. "It's our 3rd anniversary, Chloe," I said, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. I finally looked up. She was breathtaking, and she knew it. She was draped in a floor-length silk gown the color of a midnight sky, a garment that cost more than the allowance I let her think we lived on. Her blonde hair was swept up into an architectural masterpiece, held in place by a diamond-encrusted clip that caught the dim light of our modest kitchen. An anniversary? She let out a jagged, unkind laugh as she adjusted her earrings in the hallway mirror. "You want to celebrate 3 years of living in this box? 3 years of watching you freelance from a basement while our bank account stays as stagnant as your ambition? No thank you, Chris. I've done my time." "I thought we were going to the diner," I reminded her quietly. "The one on 5th, where I proposed." Chloe turned, and for a second, the mask of the sophisticated socialite slipped, revealing a raw, ugly disdain. "The diner? Chris, I am attending the Cherry Blossom Night at the Reed Holdings estate. It is the most exclusive event of the year. The CEO himself is rumored to be making his first public appearance. Do you honestly think I'm going to show up with a man who wears shoes from a discount rack and smells like domesticity? I'm your husband, Chloe. That should be enough. In this city, husband is just a title. Winner is a status. And right now you aren't even in the game." The aggressive, low-frequency rumble of a high-performance engine vibrated the window panes. It wasn't the sound of a commuter car, it was the sound of predatory wealth. Chloe's eyes lit up with a hunger I hadn't seen since the day I'd told her I had a small inheritance to buy this house. "That's Jonah," she said, grabbing her clutch. "He's a partner at Vane Tech. He's actually invited to the gala, not as a seat filler, but as a guest of the board. He's my ticket into Reed Holdings. He's the man who understands that a woman like me needs a stage, not a kitchen." Stories like this remind us that the person sitting next to you might be holding a secret that could change your life. If you're ready to see how far the rabbit hole goes, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss the moment the tables turn. Now, let's step into the shadows. She didn't offer a kiss. She didn't even look at the small wrapped box I had placed by her plate, a necklace I'd designed myself, featuring a rare pink diamond from a Reed-owned mine. She just swept out of the house, her silk train whispering a final goodbye across the floor. I walked to the window, pulling back the faded curtain. I watched as she climbed into Jonah's red convertible. Jonah was everything she thought she wanted, loud, expensive, and desperate for attention. He looked up at our house, caught my silhouette in the glass, and offered a mocking 2-finger salute. With a screech of tires and a cloud of expensive exhaust, they were gone. The silence that followed was absolute. I stood there for a long time, looking at the 2 plates of cooling pasta. Then I reached out and took a single bite. It was cold. I stood up, and as I did, the poor husband vanished. My shoulders squared, my chin lifted, and the slumped, hesitant posture of a failing freelancer evaporated. I felt the iron spine authority of the Reed bloodline return to my limbs. I wasn't hurt. I was finally, mercifully free. I walked to the basement door and punched a 12-digit sequence into a keypad hidden behind a framed photo of our wedding day. The door hissed open, revealing a sanctuary of glass, steel, and flickering monitors. This wasn't a basement, it was a command center. "Status," I commanded. My voice was no longer the soft, apologetic tone of a failing freelancer. It was the voice of the man who owned 40% of the city's skyline. "The motorcade is positioned 2 blocks away, Mr. Reed," a crisp voice echoed through the room. "The board is at the estate. They are becoming restless. The world is waiting for the ghost CEO to finally show his face. Let them wait, I said, walking toward a glass wardrobe in the center of the room. I shed the flannel shirt and the worn-out jeans, tossing them into a bin for disposal. I pulled on a shirt of Egyptian cotton so fine it felt like a second skin. Next came the suit. Midnight charcoal, woven with threads of platinum that gave it a subtle, lethal shimmer. Finally, I reached for my watch. Not the battered one Chloe had mocked, but a heavy black titanium piece, the master key. As I buckled it to my wrist, the small digital display synced with the estate's security servers, the house gates, the vaults, the encrypted files. They all pulsed in time with my heartbeat. "Contact the legal team," I said, my voice reflecting the cold steel of the room. "I want the divorce papers drafted and ready. I'm going to give Chloe an anniversary gift she'll never forget. And Marcus?" "Yes, Mr. Reed?" "Ensure Jonah gets a front row seat. I want him to have a perfect view of the man he thinks is a loser." I stepped out into the alley behind the house, where a blacked-out SUV waited in the shadows. 4 men in tactical suits stepped out, forming a silent, impenetrable perimeter. As I climbed into the back seat, the scent of expensive leather and cold ambition filled my lungs. "The Reed estate, sir?" the driver asked. "No," I said, looking at the digital map of the city's skyline. "Take the long way. I want to arrive exactly when they think I'm not coming." The SUV pulled away, moving through the city like a shark in dark water. The cherry blossom night was about to begin, and for Chloe, the petals were about to start falling. The journey to the Reed estate was a silent, pressurized glide through the neon-soaked arteries of the city. I sat in the back of the SUV, the glow of the dashboard monitors reflecting in my eyes as I watched the world pass by. On the center screen, a series of encrypted dossiers scrolled past. Financial records, property deeds, and a list of every debt Jonah Vane had ever accrued. He was a man built on credit and card stock, a house of cards waiting for the slightest breeze. "We're approaching the outer perimeter, Mr. Reed," the driver announced. "Local law enforcement has redirected civilian traffic. The private lane is clear." "Keep the tint at maximum," I said. "I want to see them, but I don't want them to see the ghost just yet." As we rounded the final bend of the hillside, the estate came into view. It was a sprawling masterpiece of glass and stone, nestled among hundreds of cherry blossom trees that had been forced into an early, vibrant bloom for tonight's festivities. Under the moonlight, the pink petals looked like fallen snow, illuminated by thousands of hidden spotlights that made the entire mountainside glow. The main gate was a bottleneck of luxury. Ferraris, Bentleys, and Maybachs were backed up for half a mile, their wealthy occupants growing restless. But as my 3 SUV motorcade approached, the heavy iron gates didn't wait for a scan or a badge. They swung open with a hydraulic hiss, a signal of absolute priority. We glided past the line of waiting cars. I leaned toward the window, my eyes scanning the crowd near the velvet ropes of the pedestrian entrance. There they were. Jonah's red convertible was idling near the valet stand, looking garish and cheap against the backdrop of the estate's understated opulence. Chloe was standing on the gravel, her hand shielding her eyes from the glare of our headlights as we swept past. She looked at the tinted windows of my vehicle with an expression of pure, unadulterated envy. To her, the occupants of these SUVs were the gods of the city. She didn't realize she had shared a bed with one for 3 years. I watched Jonah through the side view camera feed. He was arguing with a security guard, his face flushed and his gestures frantic. He was holding his invitation aloft like a shield, trying to convince the staff that he was too important to wait in line. "Identify the subject at the valet," I said into my headset. "Subject is Jonah Vane," Marcus's voice crackled back instantly. "He's attempting to use a Tier 4 invitation to access the Tier 1 private lounge. He's claiming he has a verbal agreement with the board. Is that so?" I leaned back, a cold smirk touching my lips. "Let him in, Marcus, but don't give him the lounge. Give him the garden walk. Let him and Chloe see the party from the outside for a while. I want them to feel the distance between where they are and where they want to be." "Understood, sir." "Initiating the delay now." The SUVs pulled into the East Wing Terminal, a private underground entrance that bypassed the main foyer entirely. The moment the car stopped, the door was pulled open by a man in a crisp, white-gloved uniform. I stepped out, the cool, filtered air of the terminal hitting me like a shot of adrenaline. "Welcome home, Mr. Reed," the head of household bowed deeply. "The board is gathered in the solarium. Mr. Sterling has been managing the press, but the rumors of your arrival have reached a fever pitch. They're calling tonight, the rebirth of Reed." "Let them talk," I said, walking toward the private elevator. "I need to see the floor first." I took the elevator up to the observation gallery, a hidden glass-walled balcony that overlooked the grand hall. From here I could see everything. The gala was a sea of shimmering gowns and sharp tuxedos. Hundreds of people were sipping champagne that cost more than the house Chloe and I had shared, laughing at jokes they didn't understand, all waiting for a man they had never seen. I scanned the crowd until I found them. Chloe and Jonah were walking through the lower gardens, their path blocked by a secondary security line. Chloe looked frustrated, her heels sinking into the soft turf, while Jonah was busy checking his phone, likely looking at the plummeting stock price of his own company. "Look at her," I whispered to the empty gallery. "She's finally on the grounds of Reed Holdings. Everything she ever wanted is right in front of her." I tapped my earpiece. "Elias, are you there?" "Loud and clear, Chris." Elias Sterling's voice came through. He was the chairman of the board and my most trusted confidant. "I'm currently standing near the fountain. I see our visionary friend Jonah. He looks like he's about to have a heart attack trying to get past the velvet rope. He's going to try to pitch to you tonight, Elias. He thinks a Reed merger is the only thing that can save Von A Tech from bankruptcy." "And what's the play?" Elias asked. "Give him hope," I said, watching as Chloe looked up at the balcony where I was standing, oblivious to my gaze. "Invite him to the West Library for a private audience at 10 o'clock. Tell him the CEO wants to meet the woman who inspired his success." "Cruel, Chris. I like it. I'll make sure the invitation is delivered with all the proper weight." I turned away from the glass. On a mahogany side table sat a silver tray with a single folder and a glass of neat scotch. I took a sip, the liquid fire settling my nerves. I opened the folder. Inside were the divorce papers, the ink dry, the terms absolute. Beside them was a second document, a total freeze on every joint asset Chloe believed she had access to. She thought she was trading up. She didn't realize that in my world, loyalty was the only currency that didn't devalue. "Marcus," I said, my voice dropping an octave into a tone of command. "Sir, start the Obsidian protocol for the Grand Hall. I want the lights dimmed in 40 minutes, and make sure the cameras are focused on the West Library doors. I want a recording of the exact moment her world collapses." "Copy that, Mr. Reed. The stage is being set." I walked toward my private dressing room to make the final adjustments. The pauper was gone. The ghost was fading. Tonight, the man who built the empire was coming home to tear it down. The Grand Hall was a symphony of excess. Thousands of hand-strung cherry blossoms hung from the vaulted ceilings, their delicate petals shivering every time the massive mahogany doors opened to admit another member of the 1%. I stood in the shadows of the mezzanine, my hands resting on the cold marble railing, watching Chloe and Jonah navigate the crowd like two people trying to swim through gold. "Is this it, Jonah? Are we actually in the Silver Lounge?" Chloe's voice was hushed, filled with a desperate kind of reverence. I adjusted the volume on my earpiece. The directional microphones hidden in the floral arrangements were picking up every word, every shallow breath. "I told you I'd get us here," Jonah replied, though I could see him tugging at his collar. He was sweating. The air in the Reed estate was climate-controlled to a perfect 68 degrees, but Jonah was wearing the heat of a man who knew he was a fraud. "Stay close to me. I see Elias Sterling near the Champagne Tower. He's the one who signs the checks. If I get 5 minutes with him, our lives change forever." "Our lives have already changed," Chloe murmured. Her eyes glazed with greed as she took in the diamond-crusted ice sculpture in the center of the room. "I can't believe I almost spent tonight at a diner. I can't believe I almost wasted another year in that kitchen with Chris." I felt a phantom sting at the mention of my name, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, clinical curiosity. I watched as they moved toward the very important person section, only to be stopped by a woman in a gown of shimmering emerald silk. Chloe? Chloe Thorne? Chloe froze. She turned slowly, her face pale until she recognized the woman. Sarah. Oh my God, Sarah, I haven't seen you since the wedding. Sarah was my oldest friend, the daughter of one of my father's partners, and one of the few people who knew exactly where I had been for the last 3 years. She looked at Chloe, then at Jonah, and her expression shifted from surprise to a sharp, knowing pity. It's been a long time, Sarah said, her voice smooth and dangerous. I'm surprised to see you here, Chloe. I thought Chris hated these kinds of events. Is he around? I've been dying to catch up with him. Chloe's laugh was forced, a brittle sound that didn't reach her eyes. Chris? No. Chris is... well, you know Chris. He's more of a homebody. He's probably in bed by now, dreaming of his next big idea that will never happen. A homebody, Sarah repeated, her eyes flickering up toward the mezzanine where I stood. She didn't wave, but I knew she saw me. That's funny. I always thought Chris was the type of man who could own a room like this if he really wanted to. He always had that hidden depth. He has hidden depths, Sarah, not depth, Jonah interjected, stepping forward to claim Chloe's waist. I'm Jonah Vane, CEO of Vane Technologies. Chloe is with me tonight. We're here to discuss a merger with the board. Sarah's eyebrows shot up. She looked at Jonah like he was a specimen under a microscope. Vane Technologies? I read about you in the morning briefing. Weren't you the one who just lost the Northridge contract? I heard your creditors are circling like vultures. Jonah's face turned a dusty shade of purple. Rumors. Market volatility. Tonight, all of that changes. I'm sure it will, Sarah said, offering a shark-like smile. She turned back to Chloe, her voice dropping to a whisper that the microphones caught perfectly. Be careful, Chloe. Sometimes the things we think are anchors are actually the only things keeping us from drifting into a storm. You might find that the winner you're holding onto is much lighter than the man you left behind. Before Chloe could respond, Sarah vanished into the crowd. I watched Chloe's expression, a flicker of doubt, a momentary haunting, before Jonah pulled her away toward the champagne tower. Ignore her, Jonah hissed. She's just jealous. Look, Sterling is moving. This is it. I leaned back as Elias Sterling, the chairman of my board and my childhood mentor, intercepted them. Elias was a master of the long game. He didn't look like a man about to destroy someone. He looked like a benevolent grandfather. Mr. Sterling, Jonah practically shouted, extending a hand that was visibly trembling. Jonah Vane. We spoke on the phone. This is my partner, Chloe. Elias didn't take the hand. He looked at it for a beat, too long before slowly reaching for a flute of champagne from a passing tray. Ah, yes. Mr. Vane, the man with the future of connectivity, and the lovely Chloe. We've been following Reed Holdings for years, sir, Chloe said, her voice fluttering with practiced charm. We've always felt our values aligned perfectly with your vision. Values, Elias mused, his eyes settling on Chloe with a terrifying intensity. It's a rare word these days. Our CEO is actually quite obsessed with the concept. In fact, he's been watching your progress tonight with a great deal of interest. The CEO? Jonah's eyes went wide. Is he here? Can we meet him? He's requested a private audience, Elias said, checking a heavy gold watch. In the West Library. 10 o'clock sharp. He wants to hear your pitch personally, Jonah, and he specifically asked that Chloe be present. He believes she is the key to understanding the true nature of your assets. Jonah looked like he had just won the lottery. He grabbed Chloe's hand, squeezing it so hard she winced. Did you hear that? The West Library. That's where the billion-dollar deals happen. 10 o'clock, Chloe breathed, her face glowing with a triumphant, ugly light. I knew it. I knew I belonged here. I stepped away from the railing, the darkness of the mezzanine swallowing me whole. I walked toward the West Library, the rhythmic click of my shoes on the hardwood sounding like a hammer on a coffin nail. Marcus, I said into the comms. Sir, The trap is set. Dim the lights in the grand hall when they enter the library. I want the only light in this house to be focused on the chair I'm sitting in. Copy that, Mr. Reed. Obsidian protocol in 5 minutes. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of the library. The room smelled of old paper and new endings. I sat in the high-backed leather chair, turning it away from the door so I faced the window. Outside, the cherry blossoms were falling in the wind, a storm of pink against the black night. I checked my watch, the master key. It was 9:55 p.m. In 5 minutes, Chloe would finally get the winner she had been searching for. The heavy oak doors of the West Library clicked shut with a sound like a gunshot. The noise seemed to swallow the distant hum of the string quartet, leaving Jonah and Chloe standing in a tomb of mahogany and leather. The air here was still, thick with the scent of aged scotch and the cold metallic tang of expensive security systems. "This is it, Chloe," Jonah whispered, his voice cracking like dry parchment. He adjusted his tie for the 10th time, his eyes darting around the room, taking in the towering shelves of first editions and the original oil paintings that cost more than his entire company's valuation. The West Library. People wait their entire lives just to see the inside of this door. We're not just guests anymore, we're players. Chloe didn't answer. She was standing perfectly still, her hand resting on the back of a velvet armchair. Her eyes were fixed on the massive desk at the far end of the room. The chair behind it was turned toward the window, showing only the high, leather back and the faint silhouette of a man looking out at the dark estate. "Mr. Reed?" Jonah asked, taking a tentative step forward. "Sir? I'm Jonah Vane. It's an absolute honor. I've brought the projections for the Vane-Reed merger, and I think you'll find that—" "Quiet, Jonah," I said. The two words were low, vibrating with a frequency that made the crystal decanters on the side table hum. I didn't turn the chair. I kept my gaze on the cherry blossoms dancing in the wind outside. "Mr. Reed?" Chloe spoke up, her voice fluttering with a desperate, practiced charm. "I'm Chloe. I've heard so much about your vision for the city. It's truly inspiring to be in the presence of someone who understands what it means to actually build something. Someone who doesn't just settle for mediocrity." "Mediocrity," I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "That's a harsh word, Chloe. Tell me, do you think a man who spends 3 years building a foundation from nothing is mediocre, or is he just a man waiting for the right moment to stand up?" Chloe frowned, her brow furrowing as she took a few steps closer to the desk. "I suppose it depends on what he's building, but in my experience, some men are just built to stay in the shadows. They don't have the hunger for greatness that you clearly have." I slowly began to rotate the chair, the mechanism silent and smooth. As the desk came into view, Chloe's eyes fell on the items sitting on the polished mahogany surface. Her breath hitched. There, next to a stack of billion-dollar contracts, sat a small, chipped ceramic mug, the one from the diner on 5th Street. Next to it was a pair of old wire-rimmed glasses, the left arm held together by a tiny crooked screw. "What is that?" Chloe whispered, her face draining of color. She reached out a trembling finger toward the mug. That's impossible. That's a piece of trash. Why would you have that here?" "It's a reminder," I said, my voice cold and steady, "of a night 3 years ago. A night when a man promised a woman that he would build her a kingdom, and she told him she'd be happy with a shack as long as it was with him." The chair locked into place, facing them. I leaned forward into the light of the desk lamp, the midnight charcoal of my suit shimmering and the black titanium master key watch glinting on my wrist. Chloe didn't scream. She didn't even move. She just stared at me, her mouth hanging open, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it looked like a physical blow. Jonah, on the other hand, let out a strangled, pathetic sound, half gasp, half sob. "Chris?" Chloe finally choked out the name. No, this is a joke. You're in the basement. You're supposed to be in the basement, Chris." "The basement was a test, Chloe," I said, standing up. I felt my full height for the first time in years, the power of the Reed bloodline radiating off me like heat. "I wanted to know if you loved the man who could lose everything. or the man who owned it all. I gave you 3 years of my heart. You gave me 3 years of your tolerance while you looked for a better offer. I looked at Jonah. He was trembling so hard he had to lean against a bookshelf for support. And you, Jonah, I said, walking around the desk. Each step sounded like a hammer on a nail. You mocked my cheap watch. You called me a loser in my own driveway. You thought you were taking my wife, but you were actually just taking out my trash. Chris, buddy, listen, Jonah stammered, his hands raised in a defensive gesture. I didn't know. If I had known you were the Reed, I would never… That's the point, isn't it? I intercepted him, stopping just inches from his face. You only respect power you can see. You don't respect the person. You respect the bank account. I turned back to Chloe. She was crying now, the tears carving tracks through her expensive makeup. She looked at the suit, the watch, the library, and then she looked at me with a sudden, desperate hunger. Chris, baby, she sobbed, stepping toward me, her hands reaching out. I was just confused. I was trying to motivate you. I knew you were capable of so much more, I just didn't know how to say it. We can fix this. We can be the most powerful couple in the country. Think of what we could do together. I looked at her outstretched hands, the same hands that had shoved me aside hours ago. We already did something together, Chloe. We built a life on a foundation of lies. Tonight the demolition begins. I reached into the leather folder on the desk and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I held it out to her. Your anniversary gift, I said. She took it with shaking fingers. Her eyes scanned the bold legal header, notice of asset seizure and divorce petition. You're suing me? She whispered, her voice trembling. I'm reclaiming my life, I corrected. Everything you're wearing, the dress, the diamonds, even the shoes, was bought with Reed Holdings funds. By the time you walk out of this library, the accounts tied to your name will be frozen. The house is already being cleared. You wanted a winner, Chloe. Well, I've won, and you've lost everything. You can't do this, Jonah shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. I have a contract. Elias Sterling promised me a merger. Elias Sterling does what I tell him to do, I said, turning to Jonah. And I told him to lead you into a room with no exits. Your company is bankrupt, Jonah. I bought your debt 3 hours ago. You don't own Vane Tech. I do. And my first act as CEO is to fire you for gross incompetence and fraud. I walked to the library doors and gripped the handles. I looked back at them. One man broken, one woman shattered. Marcus, I said into the comms. Sir? Open the grand hall doors. The CEO is ready to make his introduction. I threw the doors open. The lights in the grand hall dimmed, and a single brilliant spotlight hit the entrance of the library. Hundreds of the most powerful people in the world turned as one, their faces filled with awe. I stepped out into the light, leaving Chloe and Jonah in the dark. The spotlight was a blinding, singular pillar of white that cut through the velvet darkness of the grand hall. As I stepped over the threshold of the library and onto the mezzanine, the air itself seemed to vibrate with the sudden collective intake of 1,000 breaths. The chatter, the clinking of crystal, the soft murmur of the string quartet, it all vanished, replaced by a silence so heavy it felt like the world had stopped spinning. Behind me, in the shadows of the library, I heard a muffled sob. It was Chloe. She was still standing by the mahogany desk, her fingers likely tracing the rim of that chipped diner mug, her mind finally connecting the dots of a 3-year map she had been too blind to read. Beside her, I knew Jonah was a ghost, a man whose entire identity had been built on a house of cards that I had just finished blowing down. I didn't look back. I walked toward the marble staircase, the rhythmic click of my shoes sounding like a gavel. Every eye in the room followed me. These were the titans of industry, the architects of the city's skyline, and the gatekeepers of high society. They had spent the night whispering about the ghost CEO, speculating on his age, his temperament, and his power. Now they were seeing him, and they were seeing a man who looked exactly like the person they had stepped over in the lobby for years. I saw Sarah in the front row, her emerald dress shimmering. She wasn't surprised. She was wearing a small, triumphant smile, her glass raised in a silent toast. She knew. She had always known. At the base of the stairs, Elias Sterling stood waiting. He didn't say a word. He simply bowed his head, a gesture of absolute fealty from a man who answered to no one else. He handed me a sleek silver microphone, his eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a mentor seeing his student finally take the throne. I stepped onto the dais, the spotlight widening to include the board of directors. I looked out over the sea of faces, but I wasn't looking for investors. I was looking for the two people who were currently stumbling out of the library doors behind me. Chloe appeared at the top of the stairs, her silk gown looking like a shroud in the harsh light. She looked small. For the first time in our marriage, she looked fragile, but it wasn't the fragility of a flower, it was the fragility of glass that had already been shattered. Jonah was right behind her, his eyes darting frantically, looking for a door, an exit, a way back to a world where he was still someone. I tapped the microphone. The sound echoed through the hall like a heartbeat. 3 years ago, I began, my voice steady and resonant. I stepped away from this podium. I left the boardrooms and the black tie events behind because I wanted to find something that money couldn't buy. I wanted to find loyalty. I wanted to find a partner who didn't see me as a stock ticker or a bridge to a better social circle. I saw Chloe grip the railing of the mezzanine. She was trembling so violently I could see the shimmering of her dress from the floor. I spent 1,000 days living a life of simplicity, I continued, my gaze locking onto hers across the vast expanse of the hall. I worked out of a basement. I wore clothes from discount racks. I cooked meals that cost less than the champagne you're holding tonight. And for a while I thought I had found what I was looking for. I thought I was loved for the man I was, not the power I wielded. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The elite were realizing the scandal unfolding in front of them. They began to turn their heads, their gazes following the line of my sight until 1,000 pairs of eyes were fixed on the woman at the top of the stairs. But tonight the blossoms fell, I said, my voice dropping an octave. Tonight I learned that some people don't want a partner. They want a prize. They don't want a home, they want a stage. And when the stage looks a little too small, they find a new director. I gestured toward the mezzanine. Chloe, please, join us down here. After all, you've been waiting your entire life for a moment like this. The crowd parted as if I had commanded the Red Sea. Marcus and a second security officer appeared at Chloe's side, their presence a silent order. She moved like a sleepwalker, her feet heavy on the stairs. Jonah followed, his head bowed, his face a mask of humiliated defeat. When they reached the floor, they stood in a circle of empty space. The very people Chloe had spent years trying to emulate were now pulling back their skirts as she passed, their faces twisted with the kind of social disgust usually reserved for a common thief. Chris, Chloe whispered as she reached the base of the dais. She looked up at me, her eyes red and pleading. Please. Not like this. We can go home. We can talk. The home you hated? I asked, my voice carrying to the furthest corners of the room. The house you called a box? The life you called a failure? That home is already being packed, Chloe. But not for us. Just for me. I reached into the inner pocket of my charcoal suit and pulled out a small velvet-lined box. It was the anniversary gift I had left on the table. I opened it. Inside sat the pink diamond necklace, its facets catching the light and throwing a constellation of color across her face. You said I didn't understand value, I said. This diamond was mined from a site your visionary, Jonah, tried to claim was worthless. I designed the setting myself in that basement you despised. It was meant to be a symbol of a love that could survive any pressure. I snapped the box shut with a sharp clack. But you were right about one thing, I said. I am a man who understands assets, and you, Chloe, are a liability. I handed the box to Elias Sterling. Auction it off tonight. Donate the proceeds to the diner on 5th Street. I want them to have enough to never have to worry about a bill again. Elias nodded, a grim smile on his face. Consider it done, Mr. Reed. And as for you, Jonah, I said, looking at the man who had mocked my watch, your company is gone, your reputation is ash. But because I am a man of my word, I'll give you a final merger. Marcus will escort you to the edge of the property. He has a list of every firm in this city that I own or influence. By tomorrow morning, your name will be a blacklist." Jonah tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. Marcus stepped forward, his hand firm on Jonah's shoulder. With a single sharp look from me, the security detail led Jonah Vane out of the grand hall. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a man who had finally realized he was a ghost. I turned back to Chloe. She was alone now. The silence of the room was absolute, save for the sound of her jagged, sobbing breaths. "I loved you, Chloe," I said, the words private despite the microphone. "I would have given you the world because I already owned it. All you had to do was stay for the dinner." I reached for the leather folder sitting on the podium. I didn't sign it yet. I looked at the crowd, then at the woman who had traded my heart for a Tier 1 invitation. "This gala is about new beginnings," I announced to the room. "And tonight, Reed Holdings is beginning a new chapter. One built on transparency and the kind of loyalty that doesn't have a price tag." I looked down at the divorce papers. With a steady hand, I signed my name, Christopher Reed, across the bottom of the final page. The ink was dark and permanent. I handed the folder to my lead counsel, who was waiting at the edge of the stage. "The marriage is over," I said into the microphone. "The performance is finished." I stepped down from the dais. The crowd surged forward, a wave of congratulations and questions, but I moved through them like a shark through water. I didn't stop for the handshakes. I didn't stop for the flashbulbs. As I reached the main doors, I paused. I looked back one last time. Chloe was still standing in the center of the hall, a shimmering, silk-wrapped ruin of a woman. She was surrounded by the elite, yet she had never been more alone. I pushed open the doors and stepped out into the night. The air was cool, smelling of rain and the sweet, fading scent of cherry blossoms. My motorcade was waiting, the engines idling in a low, powerful hum. "Where to, Mr. Reed?" the driver asked as he held the door open. I looked at the black titanium watch on my wrist. It was midnight. Our anniversary was officially over. "The diner on 5th, I said, sliding into the back seat. "I hear they make a great cup of coffee for men who finally know exactly what they're worth." The SUV pulled away, the headlights cutting a path through the dark mountainside. Behind me, the lights of the Reed estate flickered and faded in the rearview mirror. The petals were still falling, but for the first time in 3 years I wasn't waiting for them to land. I was already moving toward the dawn.